Hey guys, and welcome back. In this video, we're going to talk about the concept of peritoneum. So what is peritoneum? Peritoneum is a closed serous sac that lines the abdominal cavity and pelvic cavity. What happens in peritoneum is it's a closed serous sac and it gets invaginated by abdominal viscera. So as the abdominal viscera start to develop at the posterior abdominal wall, the abdominal organs are going to push against the closed serous sac. Some of the organs will get into the sac. Actually, it's not inside the sac. It's basically into the whole thing without getting into the cavity itself, because as you guys look at this picture, the organs, if they can get into the peritoneum, and we call them intraperitoneal organ, it doesn't mean that they get into the cavity because it's a closed serous sac. So no way any organ can get into that cavity, but they can get into the layers of the closed serous sac. And if that happens, the part that gets attached to the organ is what we call the visceral layer. Visceral because it touches the viscera. And the other layer, which is away from the organ, that lines the abdominal cavity or the pelvic cavity, is what we call the parietal layer, because parietal means wall in Latin. All right. So if the organ gets into that and it gets fully into that, imagine that you are pushing an organ in a balloon, let's say. So if you can get that organ into the balloon, think about what will happen to these layers. They will get together at a contact, forming something called ligaments. So basically, the peritoneal ligaments is whenever an organ succeed to get into the layers of the peritoneum, and that parts of the visceral peritoneum, they get attached together and they attach the organ to the body wall. Why do we need to have peritoneal ligaments? Because think about a room that is full of machines and wires and cords. So thanks to the peritoneum that makes everything nice and neat, it makes the nerves, the arterial supply, the lymphatics, the fat, everything gets to the organ without getting tingle together in the abdomen. So that's why it's important to have these peritoneal ligaments. And another thing is because they suspend the organs to the body wall. So we really need to have this peritoneal ligaments and the idea of peritoneum. What is in the peritoneal cavity? It's a potential space, actually. It's a potential space. It means it's filled with very little amount of peritoneal fluid. This is just to prevent friction and to facilitate the movement of the organs. It should not be filled with anything. Potential space means it gets filled only if there is a problem, peritonitis, inflammation to any of the organs. In this case, we are expecting to see accumulation of fluid, and these spaces are going to be, they are known in anatomy, of course, and they will be discussed with the respective organs. All right, so the general idea of the peritoneum, as we just mentioned. Now think about these organs as they get into the closed serous sac. So again, the blue line is basically your visceral layer of peritoneum, and the red line is what lines the cavity. At the end of the day, if your organ gets successfully into the double layers, the visceral layer, it will attain a ligament, and that will suspend it to the nearby structure or the posterior abdominal wall. And some of the organs, they will remain attached to the posterior abdominal wall, like the kidneys, the ureters, the inferior vena cava, aorta, anything that's attached to the posterior wall without getting into the peritoneum, we consider them as retroperitoneal. So what happens is the liver gets into the peritoneum, and the ligaments of liver are explained very well in the anatomy of liver video. So you guys make sure to watch that video to understand the idea of all the peritoneal ligaments of the liver. For the stomach, as you get to have your stomach here, the stomach gets into the peritoneal. and it attains double layers. It has lesser omentum, all right, and it has greater omentum. Okay, so the stomach at its lesser curvature up, it has the lesser omentum that attaches the stomach, the lesser curvature of the stomach to the liver, and it has two parts. And then the greater omentum is what attaches the greater curvature of the stomach to the transverse colon. All right, so this is your transverse colon. So the transverse colon is attached anteriorly to the stomach by the greater omentum. All right, it's a double layers. It's a double layer of peritoneum. It has two layers here and two layers here, and the greater omentum is the only ligament that has these four layers of peritoneum. All right, and for the transverse colon, it's attached anterior to the greater omentum and posteriorly to the transverse mesocolon. And the transverse mesocolon attaches the transverse colon with the anterior border of the pancreas. All right, and then you have your small intestine, and the smallest intestine is attached to the mesentery proper. So the mesentery proper is what suspends the small intestine to the posterior abdominal wall. These are the ligaments that we get to see them. These are when the visceral peritoneum, when the organ gets into the visceral layer successfully, and then the two visceral layers come at a contact with each others and suspend that organ to the abdominal wall. In that case, I call it peritoneal ligament. All right, and we also have some other ligaments. We will talk about them as we proceed. Okay, so this is the general idea of peritoneum. So again, the visceral layer is what's around the organ, and when they come at a contact together, they form the ligament itself. And the parietal layer is what lines the body cavity and is what suspends the organ by the visceral peritoneum. Okay, or the visceral peritoneum, we can also call it ligament. So at the end of the day, it was a closed serous sac. So to suspend the organ, I need to attach the visceral. I don't need to attach it because already the organ was invaginating this double layer. Okay, it was a closed serous sac and the organ got inside, so it got into that because the visceral is continuous already with the parietal. So at the end of the day, the organ is going to be suspended by the attachment of, or the continuation of, the visceral with the parietal layer. All right, and as the peritoneum drapes over the pelvic organs, we consider the pelvic organs as subperitoneal, and that will be explained in the reproductive module. All right, and remember that if you have a problem or pain in the abdominal viscera, that is going to be vague and dull pain, because the visceral peritoneum is supplied by autonomic nervous system. However, the parietal peritoneum is supplied by somatic nerves. So if the inflammation is very high and it touches the parietal, it becomes very localized and sharp pain, and I can make out where is exactly the problem. And we talked about that in the innervation of abdominal viscera video. All right, so again here, this is the idea of when the visceral peritoneum come at a contact together to form the mesentery. Mesentery means something that suspends your organ to your wall, and of course your wall is already lined by the parietal layer of peritoneum. So here is the idea that your abdominal viscera were invaginating two layers of a closed serous sac, all right, to have a visceral layer, and that visceral layer comes together to form the ligament, and that attaches it to the parietal layer that lines the body cavity. So what are the intraperitoneal organ? Again, this is the organs. If you guys want to memorize them, there are many mnemonics, but I want you to understand them, and we're going to look at the most important ones, and I'm sure by the end of this you will be able to tell what are the intraperitoneal organs. Now let's look at pictures to show us these ligaments, all right, which are again the fusion of the visceral layers of the intraperitoneal structures. We have the lesser omentum that attaches the lesser curvature of the stomach to the liver, and we have the greater omentum that attaches the greater curvature of the stomach and the first inch of first part of the duodenum to the transverse colon. So this is in a real cadaver. This is the lesser omentum, and this is the greater omentum. All right? Now, what is the greater sac and what is lesser sac? If you think about this, you guys, at the end of the day, you have a space. It's actually, I know it's very occupied space, but at the end of the day, it's a space because your organs were developing into a sac. All right, that was a closed sac, and your organ got inside. So you will have a space in front of those organs and a space behind those organs. What is the reference point for me for the greater and lesser sac is my stomach. So if I have a space in front of the stomach, this is what I call greater sac. If I have a space behind the stomach, this is what I call lesser sac. It's basically a space, it's actually an occupied space. It's not a real space, it's a potential space. It only gets occupied if there is accumulation of fluid. So if you open a cadaver, you open all the layers of the abdomen, and you are sitting in front of the stomach and the greater omentum, it means here you are in the greater sac. If you try to reflect the stomach, all right, if you try to bring the stomach up, you cut the greater omentum, you release the greater curvature of the stomach and bring it up, it means this is the lesser sac. That's basically what we mean by the greater and lesser sac. So the space behind the stomach is my lesser sac. The space in front of the stomach is my greater sac. All right? Now, what is the transverse colon? Again, remember when I told you the transverse colon, sorry, I meant what's the transverse mesocolon. So the transverse colon is attached to the stomach, greater curvature by greater omentum. So if I bring the greater omentum up to look what happens behind, I will find that the transverse colon is attached to transverse mesocolon. So if you guys look at this and remember the previous description, the transverse mesocolon itself is attached posteriorly with the transverse mesocolon because I need to suspend the transverse colon, right? Yes, I know it is attached to the greater curvature of the stomach and they are fixed together, but at the end of the day, I also want to make it a transverse colon. What will make that is the transverse mesocolon because that will attach the transverse colon into the posterior abdominal wall and into the anterior border of the pancreas. Okay, so I want to suspend it and keep it in position. So thanks to the peritoneal reflections, thanks to the peritoneal ligaments, that will make sure that things are fixed in space. So if I reflect the transverse colon, above that is the greater omentum, and below that, behind it, and what attached it to the posterior abdominal wall is basically my transverse mesocolon. Okay? What else do I have? Small intestine is an intraperitoneal structure. And because it's an intraperitoneal, it has a mesentery. It has attached layers of visceral peritoneum that suspends that organ into the posterior abdominal wall. And the root of that is what I call root of mesentery. So this is basically the root of mesentery. And the ligament that goes all the way to the organ, all of these are my mesentery proper. Inside that, I have the arteries, the nerves, the lymphatics, and everything that needs to reach the viscera itself. So from the tube of the small intestine all the way to the posterior abdominal wall, all this structure is basically my mesentery proper. All right, so this is the root of mesentery, the start of it, and everything here is the mesentery proper, which is the ligament that attaches and suspends the small intestine. All right, so this is again is the mesentery proper. And if you look at the small intestine here, you will find that it's suspended by the mesentery proper, and here exactly is the root of mesentery. Moving on, again, if I try to cut the small intestine and keep it on a side, I can find that the root of that is the root of mesentery. So that was the large intestine outside. I had the ascending colon, transverse, and descending. And here I cut off, I removed the small intestine so you guys can see the root of mesentery, the start of the mesentery proper of small intestine. Okay, so it comes all the way by a line from the upper left to the lower right. All right. So what else do I have? You guys, if you look at the sigmoid colon, you guys can see that this structure here, the ligament that attaches the sigmoid colon to the posterior abdominal wall, this is the sigmoid mesocolon. The same idea, the same concept. All right. That part of the colon could successfully get totally into the invaginate the double layers of peritoneum. That's why it attained a ligament that suspended that organ to the posterior abdominal wall. However, the ascending and descending colon, they could not successfully get inside. So they are considered as retroperitoneal. If you guys look at the descending colon, you will find that the peritoneum is only covering it from the front, but it's not suspending them to the wall of the abdomen. So if it doesn't have mesentery, it means it's not intraperitoneal. It could not successfully invaginate the visceral peritoneum to attain a ligament or mesentery, and I can consider it as intraperitoneal organ. If it doesn't have mesentery, if it's not suspended, all right, it's not considered as intraperitoneal. All right. Moving on, for the appendix, if you guys look at the cecum, how do you know the cecum? The cecum is the start of the ascending colon. It receives the ileum. All right, it's a blind-ended tube. So it doesn't start from here like the other parts of the colon. No, it starts from a side. It's closed from down. So this is a reference to know the cecum. So the ileum gets into the cecum, and I can find a small organ coming out from it, which is the appendix. And there are other ways to know how to differentiate appendix in surgery, and that will be explained in the large intestine video. All right, but for now, the appendix is an intraperitoneal structure, and it has a ligament, peritoneal ligament, and that ligament is what I call mesoappendix. And once it has a ligament, peritoneal, I consider it as intraperitoneal structure, all right, or organ, and that is called the mesoappendix, and it has a lot of fat, of course, because all the peritoneal ligaments, they have fat. All right, and this is also, remember, this is a small intestine, and that is the mesentery proper. All right. All right, now other than that, all the structures that lie posterior to the that is not invaginating the visceral peritoneum, and they do not have mesentery, they are not having peritoneal ligament, they are considered as retroperitoneal. What are these structures? Kidneys, adrenal glands, pancreas, the ureters, ascending and descending colon. Remember, any structure that does not have mesentery, the ones that we already mentioned, like the stomach, it has greater and lesser omentum. The transverse column has transverse mesocolon. The sigmoid has sigmoid mesocolon. The appendix has mesoappendix. All right. The small intestine has the mesentery proper. Other than these structures, they are considered as retroperitoneal structures. And also the gallbladder, it is considered as intraperitoneal, except a piece of it. All right. What about the structures in the pelvis? They are considered to be subperitoneal because they lie below the peritoneum, and the whole story about the peritoneal ligaments in the pelvic organs will be explained in the reproductive module. All right, so I hope you guys grasp the whole concept of the peritoneum, peritoneal ligaments, intra, retro, and subperitoneal organs. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and see you in the next video.